I was born in Moscow, but I remember nothing of that time. I was just an infant when the old world was destroyed in the flames of nuclear fire, the day humanity was executed, the day the righteous and the sinful were called to be rendered according to their deeds. I, along with 40,000 others, was saved by retreating to the metro stations deep under the city. We hid from God's sight in that metro, and were spared from his wrath. Apparently, he thought that flushing us out wasn't worth the trouble. And as the years ticked by, he went about his business or perhaps died, whilst we stayed in this used up and discarded metro, just going with it, going nowhere. Now, 20 years have passed, and going up into the embrace of an endless winter is left to a few brave souls. The metro was our home, our fortress against the nightmarish mutants that roamed the tunnels and the world above. But still, we never gave up hope that one day we would return to the surface. But one day, I, a foolish child, snuck away to the botanical gardens. There, saw something, a creature, a dark one. And as I fled back to the safety of our dark, damp burrow, a creature that lived under the sun followed me. This new threat appeared, and we found ourselves in a war to determine the very existence of our species. Life was never easy in the tunnels, but it was our home. There was comfort in its routines, in seeing the same people day after day. But since the mutant attacks had escalated, fear ruled the station. I had just turned 20, and could never have imagined what would have followed on the morning that my stepfather's friend, Hunter, arrived at the barricade. Once again, all sorts of nonsense started to fill my head. The Dark Ones. I'd come across those damn non-humans once during my barricade watch, and I'd been scared silly. But how could I not have been? So you're sitting there on watch, you're warming your hands by the fire, and suddenly you hear it. From the tunnel, from somewhere in the depths, a regular, dull knocking rings out. First in the distance, quietly, and then even closer, and ever louder. Then suddenly your ears are struck by a horrible graveyard howl, and it's coming closer. And then complete mayhem. Everyone jumps up. They haul the crates and sandbags they'd been sitting on into a barrier, and the most senior among them shouts with all of his might, "Alert!" Reserves from the station rush in to give support at the 300th metre, where the blow will have to be absorbed. They pull the cover from the machine gun, and people throw themselves to the ground, behind the sandbags, directing their guns at the mouth of the tunnel, taking aim. Finally, having waited for the Dark Ones to draw closer, they turn on the spotlight, and strange, delirious silhouettes become visible in its beam. They are naked, covered in black, glossy skin, with huge eyes and mouths like gashes. They're striding rhythmically, airily ahead, toward the fortifications, towards death, with reckless abandon, without wavering, closer and closer. There they are, 3, 5, 8 beasts, and then the first among them suddenly throws back its head and emits a howl like a requiem. You feel a shiver up your skin. You resist the urge to run, to throw your gun aside, to abandon your comrades, to abandon everything to the devil and run. The spotlight is shone directly into the muzzles of the beasts to target their pupils with its bright light. But it's obvious they're not even squinting. They're not throwing up their hands, no. They're staring into the spotlights with eyes wide open. They move steadily onward. Onward. Do they even have pupils? And then, finally, the guys run up from the 300th meter with more machine guns. They lie down alongside. Commands fly overhead. Everything is ready. The long-awaited "Fire!" thunders. Several guns begin to rattle, and the big machine gun rumbles. But the dark ones don't stop. They don't crouch. They stride along without slowing their pace, just as steadily and calmly as before. In the light of the spotlight, you can see as the bullets tear at their glossy bodies, how they're being pushed backwards, how they fall. But they get right back up again, rise to their full height, and march on. And again, hoarsely now, because its throat has already been struck, a sinister howl rings out. Several minutes will pass by as the steel whirlwind finally breaks the unfeeling, unthinking obstinacy. And then, when all these ghouls have tumbled, breathless and motionless, the guys will finish them off with shots to the head, from 5 meters, just to be sure. And even when everything is over, even when the bodies have been thrown in the shaft, that image will continue to hover over your eyes for a long time to come. The bullets plunging into those black bodies, the spotlight scalding those wide open eyes, and they kept on marching as steadily as ever, onwards. I convulsed at the thought. Yes, it'd be better not to chat about them. Just in case. Ending my watch, I made my way through my home station, exhibition it was called, stopping every now and then to shake the hand of a passerby, or to kiss the cheek of a familiar girl, or sometimes answer questions asked by the older generations about my stepfather, a man called Uncle Sasha, but who they knew as Sukhoi. Exhibition was known for many things: our sparing way with words, our general neutrality in the constantly raging wars between those other factions that made conflict in the deeper parts of the metro. Idiots who called themselves the Fourth Reich. A group who had somehow found a copy of Mein Kampf and decided that, though not even being German, they were in fact the master race. Or there was the Red Line. Idiots who had somehow come across a copy of the Communist Manifesto and figured that, this time, that failed ideology could work. Or at least, if they renamed enough things and silenced enough dissidents, they could make it work. Monsters. Factions of monsters, both utterly convinced they were right. But lastly, exhibition was known for not much else other than its tea. Well, I say tea. It was a tea that we made from mushrooms that grew in moist places. Glowing mushrooms that didn't appear in any of my books on fungi. Uncle Sasha assured me that real tea came from something called leaves, that it was meant to relax you. He insisted that tea, in fact, wasn't supposed to glow, nor were you supposed to be able to watch cartoons on it. But I hardly think that's true. Tea is just that. Tea. And we at Exhibition decide what that means. Hell, before I worked on the barricade, I spent my working days in one of our tea factories, grinding up mushrooms, putting them into little baggies. It was a boring life. A safe life. A life I knew Uncle Sasha wanted for me. But Uncle Sasha, no, Sukhoi, wanted so many things. He wanted to keep exhibitions safe as its pseudo-leader. He wanted to be a stalker again and roam the wastes for supplies. But above all, he wanted a son. I called him stepfather when I was younger, something he enforced in those days. But now, I fear it is something he regrets. He set the parameters of our relationship from day one and made it clear to me that I was in no way his. But as I watched his eyes wander over campfires, I knew he regretted it, wished he'd never let that cat out of the bag. At least then he could pretend. He told me one evening as I came in from playing with my friends, snivelling in that pathetic way that children do. "Uncle Sasha," I cried. "Eugene told me where Mama is, why she isn't around, why it's just you and I. He told me she lived at another station, and because of me, she was eaten alive by rats. That you and some other stalkers had to save me. That is why I have no family." "Artyon," Sukhoi said. He spoke in a warm way, with all the swaddling qualities of the father he wished he was. "That's not true. Of course you have family. He stopped himself. "Exhibition is your family." "And Mama? Is it true? Was she eaten by rats because of me?" Sukhoi's face paled as the story hid behind his teeth. I watched the reflection of our campfire dance in his eyes, as even at my age I saw the memory, the horror, twist his insides. He sighed then, breathed deep, kissed my forehead, and told me the story. "Long ago, before there was exhibition, before there were the other stations like Polis and theater, there was Moscow. There was Russia. You and I, Artyon, that's what we would have been in another life." "We'd be Russia?" No, Artyon. Russians." He corrected with a laugh. "We'd be Russians." Sukhoi smiled at the word, yearning for what it once meant. "It was 2013. I was a younger man then, spent a life of duty and service in the military. An army like our stalkers, or Polis's Spartan Rangers. I spent my days in the sun then, back before our lives were lived under the dim red emergency lights of the metro." He breathed deep, having to run up to the thought. "Moscow. Beautiful Moscow. She was something to behold, Artyon. Her people, her culture, her architecture, her damned never-ending winters." I nuzzled close to him as he told the story, letting my small head move with the rise and fall of his chest. "Where is Moscow now, Uncle Sasha?" He paused before answering. "Until gone," he said. "Killed." "Killed?" I asked. "The governments of the old world were nasty, Artyon. Not as evil as the Red Line, but definitely just as foolish. My government, Russia, sought war against the rest of the world, and in turn, the rest of the world sought war with us. I hardly remember the date now, during one winter to be sure. That day, the day the sirens rang through the streets. Cars crashed into one another, people screamed, children cried, and people, like ants, flooded to the metro for safety. You see, we had planned to use it as a shelter. But a shelter can only fit so many people, Artyon. They tried pushing past one another, fighting through my men. If these people who sought refuge were not stopped, then all of us would have died. So I did what I had to. Turned my weapon on them. Warning shots, no murder. But then I saw you, Artyon. This sweet, big-eyed, calm baby being clutched against a young woman's breast. I don't know why I did it, or even really how. But I slung my rifle over my shoulder and took you from her. She wanted me to, begged me to, even as tears streamed down her face. Her face. As I stepped back into the mouth of the metro, into safety, I saw her eyes as the heavy grinding doors closed. As she was held back beyond the threshold, knowing she would be dust in a handful of seconds. I can still hear them, Artyon. As we rushed down the stairs into the depths, I could hear the others outside, banging and banging on the door, screaming to be let in. There were so many voices, Artyon. So many. And then, like God's fury, a boom rang out. An explosion sound that you could feel in your very bones. An explosion that shook everything around you, leaving you to think that the world was going to shake apart. But that wasn't the worst part, Artyon. The worst part came later. The worst part was the silence. My men, the survivors, stopped making sound as we heard the great nothing. From behind the great doors that saved us, where only a few seconds before was an orchestra of screaming, was now just silent. Sukhoi covered his face with his hands. It was strange as a child to see a man I saw so built of strength barely hold back tears. Sukhoi spoke up after collecting himself. Your mother wasn't eaten by rats, Artyon. She died saving your life. She died the bravest person I will ever know. And I don't even know her name. Uncle Sasha? I muttered, unable to find words in this sea of despair. You are not my son, Artyon. Not because I don't love you, but because I could never take you from her a second time. Not out there, but in here. He tapped his head with a finger. Sukhoi fell silent then. He mumbled once or twice more about the silence, before finally straightening up, and I knew that I'd never hear him talk about it again. The memory had been locked away in its strongbox again. He did say one other thing, though. One more thing that now lives in the back of my mind to this very day. He mumbled a distant, "There was a writer of stories before Russia was brought to its end. His name was H.G. Wells. He wrote, 'If we do not end wars, wars will end us.'" Shaking the memory from my head, finally I reached home. I decided not to wait for Sukhoi, but to go to bed. An 8-hour watch was enough to take anyone off their feet. I threw off my boots, took off my jacket, and planted my face in my pillow. And sleep didn't make me wait. The flaps of the tent were lifted, and a massive figure slipped quietly inside. Its face couldn't be seen. The only thing visible was the gleam of a smooth skull beneath the red emergency lights. A muffled voice was heard. "We meet again. Your stepfather. I see he is not here. Doesn't matter. Sooner or later, we'll find him. He can't get away. For now, you'll come with me. We had something to talk about. For example, the barrier at the botanical gardens." I stared, frozen, recognizing the man as Sukhoi's old friend, Hunter. He and I had met once or twice when I was younger, and each time he had a postcard for my wall. You see, as a child, I used to collect things that bore whispers of the Moscow Sukhoi had once described. But here, now, under the red light, there was something alien about Hunter. He came closer, slowly, silently, and his face was still not yet visible. For some reason, I felt the need to call for help, but a powerful hand as cold as death clamped onto my mouth. At last, I managed to grab a hold of a lantern, light it, and hold it up to the person's face. What I saw rendered me powerless for a moment and filled me with horror. What loomed in front of me was not a human face, but a terrible black muzzle with two huge, vacant, whiteless eyes and a gaping maw. I darted and threw myself out of the tent. The light suddenly faded, and the station went totally dark. There was only the weak reflection of some fire off in the distance. Without second thought, I rushed in that direction. The ghoul pounced on me from behind and bellowed, "Stop! You have nowhere to run!" The bellow twisted into laughter, and then into that familiar graveyard howl. I shook free and ran for the last light, but the footfalls behind me were heavy but did not hurry, as if the ghoul knew that I would be caught sooner or later. I reached that fireside, and with their back to me, I saw a stalker sitting by. I reached for him, to scream for help, but as I touched him, I watched as his head lolled back, covered in frost for some reason, and throat gashed. And in that face of death, I recognized Uncle Sasha? My stepfather. "Hey, Artyon! It was a good sleep, now get up. You've been down for 7 hours already." Sukhoi's voice rang out. I sat up in bed and stared at him, stunned. "Oh, Uncle Sasha, are you all right?" I fought the urge to ask him if he was alive, and succeeded only by the fact of it before me. "Yes, as you can see. Now get up, sleepyhead. We have guests coming." There was a familiar but muffled voice nearby as I wiped the sweat from my forehead, remembering my recent nightmare. I shuddered and pressed against the tent wall as Sukhoi welcomed our guest into the tent. It was Hunter. The nightmare came alive again. The dark, vacant eyes, the thunder of heavy boots behind me. Uncle Sasha, dead at the fire. "Hunter, good to see you again." I managed to squeeze out a greeting and reluctantly extended a hand to the visitor. Hunter's hand was hot and dry, and I slowly started to convince myself that it was just a dream. Just a fear-fueled mind after 8 hours at the barricade. Just a dream. "Listen, Artyon, be a good boy and boil us some tea." "Have you tried our tea?" Sukhoi asked the visitor. "A poisonous potion." "I know it," Hunter responded, nodding. "Good tea. They make it at theater too. Pigs will. But here, it's a different matter." I took the kettle to boil at the communal fire. It was strictly forbidden to light fires inside tents, as a couple of stations had burnt down to fires in the past. And as I watched the water bubble, I thought about what Hunter said. Theatre. It was another station on the other side of the metro, and who knew how long it would take to get there? How many transfers, crossings, how many other stations you'd have to pass through? Lying sometimes, fighting sometimes, and sometimes getting through thanks to connections. And this guy says casually, they make it at theatre too. Yes, he's an interesting character, even if a little bit scary. His grip squeezes like a vice. Having boiled the kettle, I returned to the tent and found that Hunter had already removed his raincoat to reveal a tight polo-knit jumper that encased a powerful muscular body with military trousers drawn tight. On his polo were dozens of pockets, and slung under his shoulder was a pistol of monstrous size. With a silencer and a laser sight, I stared at it. A monster like that would cost you all the bullets you had. This wasn't merely a thing for self-defense, no. This was, well, something far more vicious. Then I remembered the motto of the Polis Spartans, of which Hunter was a member. If it's hostile, kill it. I mused at the visitor's chosen title. Not a name, but a description of function. Hunter. As in, someone who hunts. Ah yes, Artyon is back with the tea. And you, Hunter, take a seat. Sukhoi was excited. Devil knows how long it has been since I last saw you. I tell you about myself later. There's not much to say. But you, there's strange things going on with you. I hear creatures are crawling around, coming from the north. Today I was listening to fairy stories while standing with the patrol. What's happening at the exhibition, Sukhoi? Hunter spoke in brief, choppy phrases. It's death, Hunter. Sukhoi's mood suddenly darkened. It's our death stealing up from the future. Our fate creeping in. That's what it is. Why death? I heard you took care of them rather successfully, threw their bodies in the shaft. Well, who are they? Where are they from? I have never heard anything like this from any of the other stations, and that means it's only happening here. I want to understand this level of danger. I want to understand their nature. I'm sensing a great level of danger. That's why I am here. Danger should be liquidated, right, Hunter? You're still a cowboy, even after all this time. But can danger be liquidated? That is the question. Sukhoi grinned sadly. That's the bitch. Everything here is more complicated than it seems to you. Much more complicated. These are not just zombies or ghouls shuffling along your cinema screen. No, Hunter, that's too simple. You'll load a revolver with silver bullets. Sukhoi put his hands together in the shape of a pistol and demonstrated. Pow pow! And the forces of evil are slain. But this is something different. Something frightening. And as you well know, it's hard to scare me. You're panicking? Hunter asked, surprised. Their main weapon is horror. People are barely holding their positions. Men are sleeping with machine guns, with Uzis. And they come at us unarmed. And everyone knows that there is a higher quantity and quality of them still to come. Some of us want to run away. I've almost gone crazy with the horror of it. Some of us have already gone crazy. Between you and me. And this isn't just fear, Hunter. Sukhoi lowered his voice. This... I don't even know how to explain it to you plainly. It gets stronger every time. They are getting into our heads. Somehow. And it seems to me that they're doing it on purpose. You can sense them from afar, and the feeling gets stronger and stronger, and the agitation gets so vile that your knees start to shake, and you can't hear anything yet, and you can't see anything, but you already know that they are coming nearer, nearer, and then there is a howl, and you just want to run. But they're coming closer, and you're starting to shake, and a while later you can see them walking with open eyes into the searchlights. I shuddered as he spoke. It seemed I wasn't the only one tormented by nightmares. I had never told anyone about them before. I was afraid I'd be taken for a coward or a lunatic. They're taking our minds. They're reptiles, Sukhoi continued. And you know, it's like they adjust themselves to your wavelength, and the next time they come, you feel them more strongly, and you're even more afraid. And this isn't just fear, I can tell you. He went silent. Hunter was sitting there, without moving, studying him, and apparently thinking over what he'd heard. Then he took a mouthful of hot brew and spoke slowly and quietly. This is a threat to everybody, Sukhoi. To the whole filthy metro. Not just to exhibition. Sukhoi was silent. He thought he didn't want to reply. But suddenly he burst out, "To the whole metro, you think?" No. To the whole progress of mankind, which got itself into trouble with its progress already. No, it's time to pay. It's a battle of species, Hunter. A battle of species. And these dark ones are not some evil spirit or some ghoul. These are the next stage in evolution. Better adapted to the environment than us. The future is behind them, Hunter. Maybe humanity will rot for another few decades, for another 50, maybe, in this cold, dark, filthy place. This metro. This hole we dug for ourselves. We will become pale and deformed down here, like the Murlocs. Remember the Murlocs from the time machine? No, but we are optimistic. We don't want to die. We will cultivate mushrooms with our own dung, and the pig will become man's best friend, and we will guzzle multivitamins with the appetizing crunch that was prepared by our ancestors in the sun. Quietly slither up to the surface to steal another can of petrol or a few more rags, or, if you're really lucky, a couple of bullets, only to slink back down into our hole, shifting nervously like thieves, hoping that nobody noticed. Because we don't belong on the surface anymore. The world doesn't belong to us anymore, Hunter. The world doesn't belong to us anymore. Sukhoi fell silent, staring at the steam rising from his tea and condensing in the twilight of the tent. Hunter said nothing, and I had to swallow the pang in my heart. I had never heard anything so defeatist from my stepfather. There was nothing left of his, "Don't worry, we'll get through it," nothing left of his encouraging winks. Now, there was just a man. A broken man. Or maybe he was all along. Maybe his strength was just a show for a little boy he wished was his. Nothing to say, Hunter. Nothing? Go on. Where are your arguments? Where is that optimism of yours? Last time we spoke, you said that the radiation on the surface would lower, that we could one day return to the world, that the sun would rise over the woods. But what? Not for me? We want to hold on to life with both our hands, but what if we look and find we are holding on to nothing? You could sit there in silence, but I know in your soul somewhere, you know that's how it is. But we like this whole business, Hunter, don't we? Me and you, we really love living. We will crawl through this stinking underground, sleep in an embrace with pigs, eat rats. But we will survive, right? Wake up, Hunter! Nobody will write a book about you called The Story of a Real Person. Nobody will write a song about your will to live, about your sense of self-preservation. How long will you last on mushrooms, multivitamins, and pork? Surrender, Homo sapiens. You're no longer the king of nature. You've been dethroned. No, you don't have to die instantly. Nobody will insist on that. Crawl on a little more in agony, choking on your own excrement. But know this, Homo sapiens. You are obsolete. Evolution, the laws of which you understood, has already created its new branch. You are no longer the latest stage, the crown of creation. You are a dinosaur. Now you must step aside for a new, more perfect species. No need to be egotistical. It's game over. Time's up. It's time to let others play. You're extinct. Let future generations relax and rack their brains over the question of what made Homo sapiens extinct. Though I don't think anyone will be interested. Hunter, who was studying his fingers through this monologue, raised his eyes to Sukhoi and said gravely, "You have really given up everything since I last saw you. I remember that you were talking to me. If we preserve culture, if we don't turn sour, if we don't stop using proper ration, if our children learn to read and write, then we'll be fine, and we'll last here on the ground. Didn't you say all that? Or wasn't it you? And now look at you. Surrender, Homo sapiens? What the hell is that?" "Yeah, well, I just figured out a thing or two, Hunter. I have felt something which you have not yet to get. And maybe you'll never get it. We are dinosaurs, and we are living the last days of our lives. It might take 10 or 100 years, but all the same. Resistance is futile, right?" Hunter offered in a mean voice. "What are you driving at?" Sukhoi was silent, eyes downcast. Clearly, this had cost him a lot, having never admitted such weaknesses to anybody, or even to such an old friend, or even in front of me. It was painful to him to hold up a white flag. "But now, you won't wait," Hunter slowly said, standing up to full height. "And they won't wait. New species, you say? Evolution, inevitable extinction, dung, pigs, vitamins. I'm not there yet. I'm not afraid of it either. Got it? I'm not putting my hand up to volunteer. The instinct of self-preservation? You call it that. Yes, I will sink my teeth into life. Fuck your evolution. Let other species wait their turn. I am not a lamb being led to slaughter. Capitulate and go off with your more adapted, more perfect species. Let them give you your place in history. If you feel that you have fought all you can fight, then go ahead, desert, I won't judge you. But don't try to scare me. And don't try to drag me along with you into this slaughterhouse. Why are you giving me a sermon? If you won't do it alone, if you need to do it collectively, you won't be so ashamed. Or as the enemy promised you, a hot bowl of porridge for every person you bring to them in captivity. My fight is hopeless? You say that we are at the edge of the abyss. I spit at your abyss. If you think that your place is at the bottom of that abyss, then take a deep breath and step forward. But I'm not coming for the ride. If rational man and refined and civilized Homo sapien chooses to capitulate, then I refuse to be called one. I would rather become a beast. And I will, like a beast, sink my teeth into life and gnaw on the throats of others in order to survive. And I will survive. Got it? I will survive. He sat down and gestured for me to pour him some more tea, but Sukhoi took the kettle from me and went to refill it, gloomily and silently. I waited in the tent with Hunter, his words still ringing with contempt. His vicious will to survive lit a fire inside me. He turned to me finally and said, "Have you heard the parable of the 2 frogs that fell into a pail of cream?" 2 frogs fell into a pail of cream. One, thinking rationally, knew that there was no point in struggling, no point in deceiving destiny. And what if there was an afterlife? So, he crossed his legs and sank to the bottom. The second, the fool, was probably an atheist. It seemed that he had no reason to flail around if everything was predestined. But he flopped around and flopped around anyway. Meanwhile, the cream turned to butter, and he crawled out. We honor the memory of the second frog's friend, eternally damned for the sake of progress and rational thought. Who are you? I finally asked. Who am I? You already know who I am. The one who hunts. The Metro is a living organism with, let's say, 40,000 cells. I am the macrophage, the immune system. I find in the infection any danger to the organism and liquidate it. That's what I do. Hunter made a gesture with his hands as though he was wringing someone's neck. If it is hostile, you kill it. G'day guys, I hope you enjoyed that story and thank you so much for giving it a listen. Remember, if you want some more scary stories, you can go to the Scary Stories for Late Nights playlist. Duskbowl has been a fantastic project to work on, and remember, if you've got any fanfic or fan art or any just questions about the series, feel free to email me at duskbowl.fm@gmail.com. I love every single one of you, and you've made being a microtuber probably one of the best experiences of my life. I want to give special thanks to my patrons, of course, being Lady Nevermore, Skulk Queen, Catherine Gordon, The Curator, and Stephen Stevens. If you see them in the comments, please say g'day. And to all of you, I bid you logs of love and shit shippers.